Good evening. Welcome to this special meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to gather more public input, as we did at a similar meeting back in September, to develop a conceptual design for the Gateway Park to the Coonamessett Greenway Trail. We're going to have a few brief presentations before we get to the main event. First, Betsy Gladfelter, a longtime Concom member, will tell us about the status of the river restoration project and an overview of some recent meetings she's had coordinating efforts among various town departments. Then we'll hear from Jessica Rittenauer, the executive director of the 300 Committee, who will talk a bit about the next steps to be accomplished on the Greenway Heritage Trail. Then Wendy Bisler, the president of the Coonamessett River Trust, will talk about some volunteer opportunities that her organization has coming up for the coming year. And then we will hear from Joe Waller and Eddie Marshall of Stephen Simpson Associates. They'll be giving the main presentation of an updated plan and leading the discussion for public input into the conceptual design. And when we get to that stage, we've been asked by FCTV to have everyone come up and speak at this microphone in the center aisle, and if it's not practical for you to come up there, somebody can bring the microphone to you. So I'll turn it over now to Betsy Gladfelter.
Thanks, Mary. Good evening. So I want to give a brief overview of what's happened the last, since we've seen you in September, actually. And those of you who have driven by on John Parker Road, you'll see that things look a little different. And so we'll start with at the end of October, we had our groundbreaking event, and many of you were there. And many of the people, the town officials and our state representatives were also there. And just to remind you, these were the plans for the lower bog, which is what we're going to talk about, which is now a free-flowing river. And again, remember that this was the original pathway of the river. The river's been made 30% longer, and the outer bends have been reinforced, and there are pools underneath them. And Mark and I have been fortunate to be part of the team who's gone out every week, and it's really amazing the changes we've seen week to week. Just to remind you, and I'm going to sort of focus when we talk about these changes week to week on these outer bends where we have this crisscrossing of logs. I always thought of it sort of as pickup sticks, but it was really detailed, very carefully constructed work, which I'll show you a couple of pictures of it. Whoop. Why is this not advancing? Wait a minute.
There you go. You can also
Here
use
we go.
this, Betsy. This will advance things.
Oh, all right. It's better. Thanks. So here we are at the end of a month later, and here are a bunch of the logs that have been put in. You can see that they were at a minimum of 25 feet long with root wad width of a minimum of 4 feet. And these machines are huge. You can see the person in it. And they handle these things very delicately. I didn't quite get that proficient when I had my half-hour instruction in it. There's Nick, at this point up to his knees in the mud, making sure they're put in the right place. And the same day, 29th of November, a little portion of the dam had been removed, and this is the first time the river's running free in 300 years. Okay, here we are into December, and all along the river channel, we have these snags, and that's where these root wads have been put in. And all along that part of the bank, here you see the root wads, here's the river. They put in this fiber cloth, and they anchor it in, and there's seed underneath that. So here's the edge of the river. At this point, you see the water's still, because the main part of the river is running in a bypass channel at this point. That's the 10th of January. 17th of January, I'm standing on this is the middle berm, looking down, and you see the entire lower dam is removed. On the 24th, Mark and I were called back at 4:30 in the afternoon because the river was returned, the channel was completely redug, and they went back through. All of this work was done using a GPS to make sure in the right area they had the right elevation. So there, Taryn and I are up on middle berm, and here's the river starting to run in its channel. And there it is, I'm walking back down south. There's Nick walking along the river. And the best part for me is that as you looked along the river, you could see these little ripples all along these meanders. Remember what it looked like? This is August 2015. And Mark just took it today. This is from where the dam would have been. You can't really see it with, I have too many lights on, I guess, actually. Well, I can leave them on for now, but there's all gravel here. It's down to the gravel. And this is, for those of you who I'm working with on other projects, this has taken a lot of my time. And now I'm switching back to your projects and also switching to phase two. Phase two, we have the 75% plans, and we've reviewed it by a technical team. Permitting's underway, including we need a Chapter 85 permit from Mass DOT. Remember that this is upper bog or reservoir bog, and there'll be a riffle underneath. This is the bridge that will be put there. I just want to end with sort of, from my perspective, why we're doing this. We have a lot of support from a number of agencies, and we have some new agencies that will be joining for the second phase. But I like to say behind all those agencies are all these people who actually love what they're doing, and that's why they're out there. And this picture we just took today, I took this one. There's one with me in it that Mark took. It has all these other people. But these are the people who met every week out to see where we are, what we're going to do the next week. And I like to say, where do those people come from? Well, they come from the opportunities that we give them. We're giving the students now. So you go in and talk to the students about natural history. You take them on field trips. You give them an opportunity to do something in the classroom about natural history. You have them engaged in a study, a scientific study that's being done. And of course, this group, T-Tech and second graders last year, ended up with something that we're going to keep that will be part of our gateway to the Greenway. Thanks. Jessica.
Thank you, Betsy. And I don't have nice photographs to show, but that was great to be able to see what things are looking like out there. So I just want to share a few words about the 300 Committee and the Conservation Commission and the Coonamessett River Trust and the collaborative work that we're doing, and how this meeting, fits into the next steps of this project. The conceptual plan that will be shown later on in this meeting by Stephen Stimpson Associates. The goal, once we have a conceptual plan that's been approved, the next phase of the project is working through construction level detailed designs of what would be the parking area, the outdoor classroom for the Gateway Park, and working on fundraising efforts. So Community Preservation Committee has generously awarded a grant for this phase of the project. We will be seeking additional public funding sources and doing some private fundraising. That would be to actually build the outdoor classroom, the parking area, and to install the interpretive panels. I know Betsy and Concom recently submitted a grant for that. So fundraising and working towards implementation. We have been meeting. Betsy pulled together a great meeting with the DPW and the police department to discuss the Coonamessett Greenway Trail system and how we can work to ensure safety and public access. And we believe that those meetings will be continuing, and we're also discussing stewardship plans in those meetings as well. The 300 Committee has long provided stewardship assistance to the town, and we want to ensure that this Gateway Park that we're designing is well cared for. So that's certainly part of the discussion as well. And establishing more trails within the Greenway. The Andrews Pondfront property, which is adjacent to Andrews Farm, 9.8 acres, is right within this Coonamessett River Greenway. That is land that the 300 Committee will be purchasing in conjunction with the town's purchase of the Andrews Farm. So that 9.8 acre property will be added to the Coonamessett Greenway system, and we'll be putting a trail into that property as well. So great connectivity and really taking advantage of the linkage and the trail opportunities that we have. So I'm going to introduce Wendy Bissler, president of the Coonamessett River Trust, and she'll share information about volunteer opportunities.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone being here this evening. As you can imagine, we're very, very excited to see everything that's happening out on the river. If you haven't been out there, it's truly spectacular to go out there and see it. It's very wonderful. I just want to quickly tell you about some volunteer opportunities. We're always looking for volunteers. What we have coming up this spring, I don't know if you're aware, but basically once the herrings start running on the river, which tends to be around the beginning of April on average, we will have people every evening from 7 until 10 at night visually counting the herring that go over there's kind of a picture there of the berm that's separating the now lower restored part of the river and middle bog that's slated for the next phase 2. If you want to help us, that would be great. We also have, we need people to go out during the day and do random looking for herring. This is for statistical reasons, so we need people to go out and do spot check, looking to see if there are herring during the day. This run, because there are no trees on the river, tends to always run at night. So that's why we put the bulk of our people there in the evening. And we have people there basically for 4 weeks. So typically what you do is you'll sign up for 1 hour per week for the 4 weeks. We also do herring tagging, so we actually corral the herring and put pit tags in the herring. We need help with that. And then that herring program with the pit tags where we can watch and see where they go up on the river system. This will be the third year that we have donated some of the numbers to classrooms so students can follow along and find out what's happening with herring and learn about the life cycle of herrings, natural history of Coonamessett River, of herring, and the importance in the history of the cultural history of our town and elsewhere on the Cape. If you want to help us develop this educational outreach and reach out to the classrooms with this, we'd welcome help with that. We're also looking for people to help us set up a website so people can track their herring. If you're good at that, we welcome help with that. And we're also going to be going out, we want to study the after effects, what's happened now that the dam is out, what is the river doing? So we're going to go out and do some measurements in the river, doing river profiles. We're also going to be helping with the restoration. We're going to be spreading seed for the vegetation. So there's many things. Whatever you're interested in, please contact us. You can see us after the meeting here. Come up to us, or you can email us at crivertrust@gmail.com. So I look forward to hearing from you. There's lots of exciting things to do, and once the weather gets better, it's going to be nice to see the vegetation just popping up on this area. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Joe Waller and Eddie Marshall from Stephen Simpson Associates, and they are going to be the main presentations. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We want to, So we'll start off tonight by giving just a little bit of background, even talking about what we talked about at our September meeting, just to give everybody, get everyone up to speed in terms of what we've been doing and kind of the information we received from you in order to advance the design. Why don't you go to the first one? We thought it was important to kind of start and step back for just a second to talk about context. And interesting about what the whole greenway means in terms of the size and scale of Falmouth. And I think for us, it was a good reminder about the importance of the project. And what you see tonight is a portion of this, but it really is part of that bigger picture. Go to the next one. And we thought it was interesting the way it starts to weave through neighborhoods, and it really becomes this element as a trail, but it really starts to pull a community together. And there's many ways people can start to plug into this and to plug into how it kind of reacts with both the river and this part of Falmouth. And not to dwell on what Betsy had shared with us tonight with the reestablishment of the river, but what we really feel is important is, granted, it's exciting what's going on the river, but what we're here to talk about tonight is this zone here. So we flagged that. And so we're not talking about the river, we're talking about how do we get to the river, how do you park, how do students come and enjoy this place. This becomes the front door. This is the threshold to what all this work is to be. So this is really the first public face. And if we go to our next slide, we actually put these bullet points up to remind everybody what was some of the key elements that we got out of the September meeting. And I think probably one of the first ones is, am I at the right place and do I know it? You know, it's like, is this the beginning? Is this the trailhead? And then I thought what was critical is about universal access, making sure things are ADA. Traffic on John Parker Road for when you think about student groups coming there. Buses turning, we have to be really mindful about turning radiuses and what people see and what they don't see. Parking locations, good accessibility for a whole range of different types of user groups. Clear signage, make it inviting. Think about the dog walkers as the guardians and kind of the policemen. You know, these people that are there kind of on a daily basis. These are the people that can really have another set of eyes on this entire project. And then public use and benefit. How do we reach the river? How do we see the water? This is a point that was repeated on a number of points by a number of folks. Because if you're going there with children or grandchildren, the water is a magnet. And that was repeated by a number of people in September. And a platform to see the expanse of the river. And I think when we think about scale and when you start to get down close to the water, you don't fully appreciate the extent of what is being done. Keep items understated, have a light touch, make sure that the river is the most important thing. And people like the idea of classrooms, the idea of teaching, that it's a learning opportunity for everybody. You know, we tend to focus on the children, but I think anybody who would come to this, and I think the slide about having the river run for the first time in 300 years, I thought that was fantastic. That was a beautiful slide, Betsy. Multiple places to sit, how do people gather, that didactic environment, explaining about the rewilding of this floodplain. And this is something that it hasn't been this way in about 300 years. I think it's fascinating when you stop and step back and think about what is happening to this part of Falmouth. And how will this landscape change? And we have no wild rivers, and what does this mean to the larger context? One of the things that we got out of the September meeting was to look at some of the other projects that had been done regionally. So Joan and I did go up and look at the Audubon project in Tidmarsh, which is fascinating. I would encourage everybody to go up there. It's beautiful work, and the scale of it is quite impressive. And the reuse of granite block, and how do we kind of share that stone and think about the age of stone and how we can kind of reuse it and have it actually a more useful component of what this new visitor area will be. Now Joe will start to walk us through some of the new design, and I'll add some color. Are you wanted there?
So I think I'm, yeah.
Okay.
So as Betsy is here, the site is already being used in a lot of the ways that we're imagining it being used in an expanded function. So here Betsy is with a group of local students, educating them about the river restoration, the river ecology, you know, how this landscape has changed in the past and how it will change going forward. So a lot of what we're imagining here is already happening. People are already using this site for dog walking, passive recreation, to access the river. I was there with Betsy this fall, and people's dogs were swimming in the river. They were coming down to the river. There was the research that the Coonamessett River Trust is doing, the herring counting. So a lot of the activities that we're imagining happening here are currently happening. In addition to that, we imagine new opportunities, new elements within this landscape that can support the activities that are happening currently, from self-guided explorations and group-guided explorations, places to get out into these landscapes, into these emergent landscapes, opportunities for groups of students or community members to gather and to learn more about the fauna and flora of this community, prospects, different places to gather in more intimate settings, places to get up with a prospect and to overlook these landscapes. So these are just some experience precedents that we used as inspiration as we started to think about how this site would develop. This is a ortho of the site prior to the restoration, obviously, but the restoration is currently ongoing. Very excitingly, as Betsy showed, we have John Parker Road to our east, which is a kind of a major cut-through road from Sandwich Road down to Route 28. And as Eddie referenced in the September comments, the concern about traffic, about visibility. The current drive currently is on access with Clark Street there to the south, and we'll talk a little bit more about the challenges of that, but the river basin is lower than John Parker Road, which presents some challenges from policing as well as safe egress and exit from John Parker Road and from the site. Currently, student groups are being dropped off on John Parker Road, so school buses are stopping there and loading and unloading students on this busy road, which is obviously not ideal. The site is also currently being used by vehicular use. There's parking, crossing the dam, which has currently been removed, and then there's driving, which is overlapping with passive pedestrian use around the perimeter of the park. So thinking about how can we alleviate some of those potential conflicts between uses. So we started to look at diagrams. The major elements here are accommodating parking, a more formal parking for approximately 30 vehicles, which could allow for bus drop-off, loading, and unloading off of John Parker Road. This is one potential option that we explored, where we would reuse the existing driveway on access with Clark Road here and come down to a single loaded parking lot with emergency and service access through the parking lot with some sort of classroom element proximate to the parking lot. Oh, sorry for that. And zooming in here, we just started to explore some of the challenges and advantages of this scheme, starting with our property line. This space between our neighbors is actually too narrow to have a required width of two-way driveway. As I mentioned earlier, John Parker Road is higher elevationally from where you'd be entering and exiting, so we'd have limited view oncoming traffic in either direction, presenting a bit of a challenge. The expanded parking lot is quite close to a couple of residential lots here to our east, as well as being at the base of this hill from John Parker, which reduces visibility for police patrols from John Parker. And that was one of the topics that came up in our meeting with town staff, is trying to make this a safe place requires it to be easily patrolled by the police. So something that they were quite keen on was more visibility to the parking lot, which led us to this idea of thinking of a parking potentially off of John Parker Road, which is shown here, with a pavilion classroom element closer. Zooming in, some of the advantages of this are that the parking lot is at the same level as John Parker Road, which allows for safer view angles for drivers entering and exiting, as well as for police patrolling regularly on John Parker to be able to see who's occupying the park at all times of day. We have improved views of this restored river from this higher vantage point. So for those visitors who are maybe just stopping for lunch or driving by, they'll be able to see this landscape and be able to experience it without having to dedicate more time to getting out and moving through the landscape. So there's an opportunity for more people to view it. As Eddie alluded to, that kind of universal access includes being able to visually experience this site. And we move further away from our neighbors. We restore areas of the riverfront for passive use instead of parking. And we also start to get a bus loading zone off of John Parker Road. This obviously is proposed within an area that currently is a successional woodland. We would need to do some tree removal, but we would also be doing a landscape restoration in that we would get more sunlight to the ground plane for a more diverse habitat, as well as landscape restorations of these disturbed zones along the edge of the river. So it would be a net balance in tree removal to tree replacement in this scenario.
And when we look at layouts where we have an entrance and an exit, it's very helpful for the whole bus access. As Joe mentioned, we've got the bus loading and unloading. But when we have one entrance and exit, it means that we have to provide a turnaround area for the bus. And that requires a lot of pavement. So this becomes efficient in terms of how the bus can work in this area as well as the safety. So there was a lot of attributes to thinking about the relationship to John Parker Road and having the two entrances and exits.
These are just a couple quick explorations of some of our initial studies of this. Admittedly, quite messy and maybe illegible, but still exciting nonetheless. And I think one thing that we wanted to share about this is we see a huge opportunity in this zone of this kind of transitional hillside between restored river and community to create this really dynamic experience that is more than just the river, that it starts to become a supplementary landscape to the river, this transitional landscape from open river up into the forested highland to the edge. And so this is what we're starting to explore here, how we articulate this edge, how trails wind up and down this hillside so that it's a more diverse and dynamic experience than just walking at that edge between two landscapes, really being immersed within multiple landscapes.
And honestly, I think we were both intimidated and excited about everything that was happening on the river. And knowing that we were doing our work next to it, but not necessarily part of the river, it really kind of raised the bar for us in terms of let's have something that really responds in terms of something organic, something that feels like it's part of the space, something that has the same vitality, or a visit area that has the same vitality that is going on with the river itself.
So here, we'll show this in more detail, but we have a parking lot at a higher level with trails winding up and down, a opportunity for a classroom to be embedded within that hillside topography. So it becomes an enclosure without being a structure. It kind of dematerializes itself within the hillside, so it becomes subservient to the greater landscape. And we'll just pan now to the more developed master plan here. So just to give reference, we have John Parker Road to our east, the Middle Dam Path here to our north, the dam currently removed and a footpath to be put in its place, and the river, which is currently flowing freely. Currently there are these access trails around the perimeter, which we're proposing to maintain, and those would link in to points on the north and south for service and emergency access. We have a parking lot here off of John Parker with one entry aligned to Victor's Lane and another further north with two-way traffic and two entrances so that we can get easy bus loading and parking occurring concurrently. We have a system of trails winding up the hillside, back down over this classroom, which we'll show in more detail, and even the opportunity for what we're calling a river overlook, maybe a boardwalk that pushes out over this restored river and puts people in more proximity to the landscape. I forget that I can advance here. So here we are looking to the northeast with the future footbridge crossing the free-flowing river. You see the trail system around the perimeter of site. You see the trail system gently sloping up this hillside to an elevated parking spot with walkways over the top of this, what we're calling den classroom, with great prospects across this restored river system into the greater landscape beyond, and eventually a restored river moving up into the middle dam. So just moving through in a little bit more detail here, we'll maintain our service and emergency access here at the current entrance. This would be a single lane drive with some sort of gated point to restrict access, but to allow for those necessary uses of the site. Where there's a beautiful maple tree here, which we're hoping to maintain and create this kind of confluence and gathering point around that tree, this trail system which winds up to the parking and over the top of the den classroom, linking into this river trail along that lower level and pushing out over the landscape. This is a view looking north on that river trail with the restored river here to our left, and the sloping hillside walk going up to the parking beyond. You start to see this restored, diversified hillside landscape in the foreground, transitioning down to the river floodplain landscape typology beyond. So you're straddling many landscape typologies from successional forest down to hillside and into floodplain. You also have this opportunity to occupy the roof of this den classroom and then even push out over the river landscape. This is an enlargement of the middle of the site, most of which we've discussed, but this diversified planted hillside, the Prospect Trail over the den classroom, that river overlook, and another trail system moving to
Joe,
the side.
if you could go back to it just a minute, Joe. So what we were hoping to achieve is thinking of this landscape, to think that it could have been a landscape that was actually designed by the river. When you think about the undulations and the geometry of it, everything is really driven by the river, and even for the parking areas itself. The whole idea that we're taking our cues from the restored river, and now this is some of the geometry that is then played out as either walking paths or parking areas.
This is a view from the parking lot off of John Parker, looking to the west, maintaining many of the existing trees there, supplementing it with additional trees, also getting a more filtered view down to the restored river system. Here you see the start of that Prospect Trail, which takes you over the lid, this vegetated lid of the classroom below. These are just some character images of how that parking arrival sequence might appear. You know, very natural, granular materials, permeable materials with informational signage. This, as Eddie alluded to, is from Tidmarsh in Plymouth, an Audubon property. Great informational signage that gives you, you know, information in a short amount of time as well as more in-depth information. So these are opportunities for kiosks around the site, you know, careful directional devices of natural materials which protect sensitive landscapes and sensitive habitat. How this parking lot is imagined to be carefully fitted within this existing vegetated area in a very, you know, soft touch, low-tech way. This is an aerial view, zooming in a little closer on that parking lot area, that Prospect Trail over the roof of this den classroom. You're starting to see the repurposed granite blocks from the lower dam here being used as the stadium stadium or amphitheater beneath. And you're seeing the river overlook, bringing you in close proximity to the flowing river and over that differentiating landscape typology. And then you see the trails winding back up the hillside. The classroom was inspired, as we've alluded to, these naturally occurring dens throughout New England of ledge and stone, which create these protected areas, which are very naturally occurring, you know, counterposed to the reality that we have to build something in order to create that. So this was a precedent that we admired, which is a structure, but because it's vegetated, it's permeable, it starts to become invisible almost and becomes a new landscape opportunity within the site. And so this started to become the cue for how we could build this den classroom within this hillside where we have this natural topography sloping up from the parking lot in John Parker and sloping down to the river landscape, how we can occupy that and create this fairly simple structure of cast-in-place concrete or built-in-place concrete that creates this opportunity for protection beneath and a vegetated landscape above.
And
here,
and when we think back of some of the comments that we received in September, there was a pretty common thread that people didn't want a building. They wanted to have some kind of a shelter, something that reinforced the idea that you knew that you had arrived. The importance of having an area where students would come and really spark their curiosity. And so when we think about those type of components and wanting to have kind of a structure that served that, but yet when you're certainly driving into this is the last thing you will see, and feel like it is something that's discovered, and it's something that you would come upon it. So we feel that it does have the attributes of having that lighter touch. I think when you see this form, I think people are, it is something that over time, as nature and plants kind of embrace this type of structure, it becomes much more welcoming. And I think when you first see it, you may think of it, it has the potential of feeling alien, but it's the plants over time, much like the way the river is restored and the way that floodplain is restored, that it now takes on the life of being part of this river. And I do think in terms of having a place that would be memorable for students in wanting to go back there or wanting to bring their parents back there on a weekend, that these are some of the goals that we were looking at in terms of what we want to build. We don't want it to be a building, we want it to be part of the landscape, and we wanted it memorable. So I think there's some really compelling ideas here that really pushed us, and I think Joe really led the design idea about let's not do something that's been expected. Let's do something that is worthy of what we're doing to the river.
So here's a view approaching, and as Eddie was referencing, the landscape starts to erode the edges and over time kind of overtake or renaturalize the initial construction as well as the roof, and really trying to make that ceiling dematerialize and become a vegetated opportunity while providing that protection, giving opportunities for gathering beneath here, and this greater kind of classroom opportunity beyond this. We started to think about this space having the opportunity to have a larger group at its center while also allowing a couple to sit at its edge and not feel like you were encroaching on the main gathering spot. So there's opportunities for individuals to sit further at the edge on these stone blocks with sky above, or to move beneath the lid or ceiling of the structure. And the river overlook also provides an opportunity for someone to walk the perimeter of the river without encroaching on a group at this classroom. So if you were out walking and there was an educational event occurring there, you'd have the opportunity to go on the river overlook and not have to come into that event if you chose not to. And then just passively using this space to be able to tuck in out of the sun, because we're west and south facing, we're getting good light penetration into this space, so it's a very bright and welcoming space within that river landscape. And then moving to the north end of the experience, the middle dam will eventually be removed and replaced by another crossing of the river. In the interim and in the long term, we're also imagining that this river access point, which is currently very very heavily used, would remain. So yeah. And to the north here, another gated service access point. And this is a view looking back to the south at that vegetated hillside, the ceiling of the den, the river overlook, the restored river beyond. You can imagine from here prospects down to the river to wildlife occurring within this ecosystem. These images are a little washed out, but just the nature of the trails being quite natural, providing the necessary coefficient of friction for universal access is critical, and these are some examples of paths that we've done and others have done that are granular in nature, but meet the federal government's requirements for that coefficient of friction, which would still have a very soft feel, but would allow access for all. Opportunities along the trail overlooking and crossing the river, so you get that direct experience with the water, and this will be occurring in the near future with the boardwalk at the lower dam, and opportunities for it to occur throughout the river experience. And then opportunities for gathering and being immersed within these landscapes in a sensitive way, and giving people opportunities to get a higher prospect along the trail for a better vantage. This is a view from the north on the western side of the river trail, looking back towards the south, the river, the dam, which has been removed, the den classroom, the parking, and the remaining vegetation beyond.
This also gives you a sense of the microclimate that will be achieved with this kind of south-facing or west-facing prospect. The idea that on a cold day in October or cold day in April when we're out there counting the herring, this would be a good place to go to, get out of the wind. So it really extends the life of these outdoor spaces.
And that concludes our presentation. Thank you. Are we open to questions? We're open to questions and comments. If you wouldn't mind coming up to the microphone, thank you.
The vegetation that is shown in your renderings looks like it's real low, maybe a foot or two tall. Is that something that would naturally maintain itself, or is there going to be a need to come in and pull out saplings or other things that would change it over time?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we would imagine a landscape which is self-sufficient and probably successional in nature. So initially, it might have a lower profile, but as other species are introduced or germinate within it, I think it would start to evolve and become a transitional, successional forest with birches and maybe lower shrub material, then eventually succeeding up to a wooded environment. I think the river will go through a similar succession in that, now that the riverbed has been restored, that'll start to revegetate and eventually succeed to a more wooded and less open environment over time. So we imagine that natural succession occurring within the landscape and not being a maintained environment.
Follow up.
Yep.
When that vegetation, the successional process continues, would that mean that the views that are pretty dramatic from that platform would eventually cease to be as dramatic because you can no longer see the river? You'd be kind of looking across the canopy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think something to give more thought to. Definitely the successional nature would start to filter that view. You wouldn't have that 180-degree view that we've started to show over time, but could be carefully edited if there was a desire to maintain that.
I think that is one of the pluses that when we start at that higher elevation and we bring everybody up. So I think the impact of plants that would be growing over time would be easy. It would make it easier to manage. And I think when you look at the renderings that we had done, we look at what's this landscape like within the first 5 years. So we're not trying to oversell this idea. The idea that you will see the structure to a degree when things first go in. And it does take time for nature to come in and reestablish a native plant type. But I think, as Joe mentioned, it has a possibility of being kind of a filtered view. But when we start at a higher elevation, we at least have a little bit more lead time in terms of what plants we would want to edit out or what plants we would like to keep.
I'm not trying to hog it. I was asked to get my name stated for the record. My name is Tom Chilton.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Tom.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug Brown. So that's a pretty impressive plan. I like the idea and the concept. I'm curious, it looks expensive, and what's the funding for this?
Another great question. We're imagining very common materials. As we've referenced, the stone block is repurposed from the dam that's there. So we're really just looking at the labor to set that stone, which we've done a lot.
Actually,
And
Joe,
yeah.
if you go back to the section that just shows kind
Yep.
of that concrete frame, which we have had looked at by a structural engineer. So when you think of what we're proposing in the drama of it, it's actually quite simple. And we have had this looked at by a structural engineer that we work with faithfully. who said that this is actually a very straightforward process. So I think we have started to kind of look at how does this get built? And we're not looking at this blindly as, oh, this is a pie in the sky. No, we can put in the concrete. We have done many projects with a green roof. We know the plant types that will do well here. We know soil depths. We know how to drain the top of that roof. So it really becomes this C-shaped object. And it's really much more attainable when you start to look at what are the bones of this and how simple the idea is.
My name is Peter Walsh. I have a question. If you have had any discussions about using bicycle paths in the project?
We've had discussions about the use of it, and that was part of the discussion with the town about crossings at John Parker Road as well as at Sandwich Road. There is a long-term discussion in town about how those crossings can be made safer for those to cross. So that's kind of a long-term town planning effort. The paths have been thought of, though, to be wide enough and of a material that would be supportive to bicycling, to strollers, to wheelchairs, to all forms of use. So.
Personally, I think that's a great question. As a cyclist myself, I think the more and different ways we can get people to use this space and use the entire trail, it becomes, it just expands the value of this asset for everybody.
My name is Chris Neal. I've been working with the Coonamessett River Trust. So my reaction to this initially is like a lot of this is driven by parking and the need to have a bus placed. A couple of comments. One is, did you explore using the already disturbed areas rather than disturbing a new area as part of a restoration project? Did you explore using the area to the north? I get it, why you're pushing it away from the area which has been kind of the traditional entrance, but how about the other entrance up by the middle dam, by your little dam path there, or even a little bit further north than that? There's a lot of area that's already highly degraded that people already use as parking with some modifications that looked a lot like your Tidmarsh parking spaces for 3 or 4 cars. You might serve this purpose. I'm interested whether you explored that. And the other thing is 30 cars is too many. The current use, I have to say, except on those days when we have a lot of Coonamessett River volunteers, we may get 5 or 6 cars, but the maximum is in that range, not 30. And I don't think it would be needed to, especially if you're disturbing a new area, to have parking for anywhere near that many cars. So those two things are my main comments at this point.
I would say that one of the reasons why we were kind of attracted to this was really the traffic concerns on John Parker and what's it like to be swinging on and off that road. I think when we do tend to move further north, the sight lines aren't quite as clear. And certainly having the entrance and exit, as I explained earlier, was a benefit to the bus. I think we can still certainly tailor down if we start to look at a lower need. And Joe, I mean, you're going to...
Yeah, I think those are good points. I think we did look at other locations, as Eddie alluded, as you move to the north. The S-curve in John Parker Road is one of the more dangerous road situations within town, and so something that we were trying to not make worse, and putting the parking lot along a straighter section with better sight lines was a desire. Also, this is the location where the trailhead is imagined to be in this classroom opportunity, so having parking proximate to it was a strong consideration. But as Eddie alluded to, we can always tailor and think about scale, and we would be doing a full survey of the property and tailoring the design to existing locations of important vegetation.
Hi, I'm Ralph Herbst. I wondered if you would be recommending electrical power into the area where the pavilion is, and also a drinking fountain for fresh water.
Yeah, those are great ideas, and some of the things that we started to talk about with the town is, you know, the safety considerations, whether we have cameras, motion detecting or motion sensing lights, the amenities in water, and all those things would be important considerations as we move forward.
Some things that we would do would put like lighting in the parking lot, but at the same time would want to make sure that we're not doing anything that would be adversely affecting the river. I think we would take our cues from the people who are doing the fish counts and, you know, the trust that is now looking after this, and making sure that any of those type of amenities are first vetted through what's the health of the fish in the river first.
Same name as before. You mentioned in the opening, and perhaps it was Betsy that mentioned it, that from a safety and security standpoint, this development parallel to John Parker allows some visibility of law enforcement down into the parking area. Am I correct in understanding that there would be no visibility whatsoever to the tiered seating that's below that roof? Would that be just an invisible dark spot?
That, yeah, is not visible from the John Parker point perspective. It is something that we reviewed with the police during our meeting, and they didn't have concern with that that point, but it is a consideration.
It just seems like it's inviting, you know, great party place, out of sight, dark.
Yeah,
Great environment.
that was our concern too, and one of the reasons why Betsy organized the meeting with the police is really to kind of vet and talk about all of these considerations, and the police were not concerned. I mean, concerned to some degree, but not greatly concerned. They said that this will be a place that is used and known, and that type of activity tends to be less visible, and the places that is occurring would not be this type of space.
Hi, my name is Linda Deegan, and I would like to say that this place is already used and known and well partied. And that's one of the reasons the police were worried about the sight lines. But that's not why I wanted to stand.
Sure.
So again, my name is Linda Deegan, and I'm a member of the Coonamessett River Trust, and have been working for a long time to make this happen. And I would like to congratulate you on this plan. I think there's a lot of aspects to it that I find really quite appealing. And I think that, you know, I think part of what I like about your vision is this idea that you're building on the river, you've got the squiggly lines. I like the trail at the top of the hill for people to look on. I think this gentleman's right. I think there will be trees growing along the river relatively quickly. That's actually part of the restoration plan, but you know, that's okay. There will also be wide open places that will be a wet meadow. That is also part of the plan. So we do want a mix there. I guess like you know, there, and I like the ADA stuff. When we built the bridge over Flax, we made sure it was ADA. We've talked a lot with Betsy about making sure that all of the path is ADA. That's been an important consideration for the trust as we developed things. I think that it really would be useful to try and sort of expand our vision a little bit. We do have the lower, middle, and upper section of the rivers, all of which will be restored, and all of which will be part of this magnificent new place for the town. And I think for some of this, it might be good to take a little bit of a step back and think about, where is the best place to put parking? And again, I favor using already open areas that are flat and, a little bit further up John Parker Road. And having worked for 15 years to get trees in this landscape, I got a problem with cutting them down as part of a restoration.
Really?
Yeah, it's just, it's my thing. So I do like the idea of using the granite blocks to build some sort of a space. I think there's maybe not quite as many of them as you think there might be, but we'll wait till the bulldozer's finished to figure that part out. And I do like the idea of having it sort of cut into this hillside. That has an appeal to me. Not so wild about the skywalking thing. One of the things that came across loud and clear at the September meeting was this idea of a light touch. And so within the constraints of building a parking lot and putting a building there, yeah, that's a light touch. But it also seems like fairly heavy development to me in some ways. So it's done with natural features, done with the S shapes and things like that. But that seems like a bit much to me when we were talking about, having a trail along the river with a place that kids could aggregate in at some point. I know we focused a lot on the lower river for a very long time because that's what we had access to and that's what we were thinking hard about.
Yep.
But I really encourage you guys to open up your vision, right? Just as we're opening up this whole lower river, let's open up our vision and ask ourselves whether or not there isn't maybe a better place within those 3 units of that lower section of the river for a bus to come and people to park and a pavilion to be built. It doesn't, this is the start of a trail, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be on point 0, the lower section, because it's actually not the start of the river or the end of the river, depending on how you want to look at it. It's
Right.
kind of an arbitrary place where we built a dike a long time ago.
Okay.
So I think we could think about it. I encourage you to think about it maybe a little bit more expansively, right? So if you really took a hard look at that entire landscape from this lower section to the middle section to the upper section, is there some place that's already hard used without trees that we could improve with some of what you have here?
Hi, Wendy Bisler. I have to say I'm kind of torn on this because on one hand, it's rather exciting to see this become this area that it be even more used than it is now by the public. On the other hand, we have fought for 15 years to take this landscape that had been so dramatically impacted by human development and try to make it as natural as possible. And this is, we're taking something that's natural right now and again impacting it with human development. I agree that the parking area should be much, much reduced. When we go out there, there's never more than 3 or 4 or 5 cars. So I can understand the access for the buses, but the parking area doesn't nearly need to be that expanded. I have to admit, I kind of like the overlook, being able to look over the river. I think that's dramatic and will be beautiful. I don't know. On one hand, it looks very exciting and wonderful. On the other hand, I'm thinking, well, we're trying to make this very natural, and it's looking more and more kind of artificial. It kind of worries me thinking about bringing a water fountain in and lights and things like that, because we're trying to lessen our impact on this landscape, and yet we're making it more artificial. So I kind of echo the fact that there are other areas that have already been impacted. I do know that you're going to be filling in, this is where the
This
sand
is where
pit
it
now,
is,
right?
a lot of this area, I was
It
just
is
gonna,
already kind of
it is pretty disturbed along this
disturbed,
edge,
yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying with the
Yeah,
parking area,
yeah, so
but
it's-
this
it's
is
kind of-
where,
yeah,
this is
right.
where the pavilion
So
and
there's
parking
nothing
is.
very pretty about that
So
area right
I don't
now.
think we're talking about a
Yeah.
high-quality woodland
right,
where we're
right.
proposing
Yeah.
this, so.
Yeah. So, like I say, I have mixed feelings about this, so.
Yeah. Like-
Do you want me to hand it to you?
Oh, you're gonna jump
I'm
in
gonna
here.
use this one. I just want to make a couple of comments. One is, I know right now they're probably like 5 cars is maximum, but presumably this is going to be the gateway to the Greenway, and we're thinking that more people are going to be visiting, and this will be the area where we'll have our kind of overall ecology, history, ecology, trying to think of the others, geology, hydrology, and restoration. Sorry. Whoa. My cell phone talks to me sometimes, too. But I think you're looking at the way you have it drawn with the parking. You have sort of this all squared off parking. But I think it's going to be much more natural. There'll be a couple of little places tucked under this tree and a couple of places. I don't know, I mean, how many cars, wait a second.
Well, sorry, I was encouraged by some of the pictures you showed.
Yeah, and how many cars are 5 is too few, 30 maybe is too many. That's something we can talk
agree.
about.
Somewhere in
The
between.
other thing, personally, I would like to see is, one of the things we're encouraging around town in areas are pollination areas for pollinating plants. And that roof seems like a perfect place to have kind of a pollinator garden. And, no, it's, if you left it all to grow back totally naturally, it wouldn't be, but that's why we manage some of these areas. And that would be relatively easy to manage since it's right by the roadway.
So is the idea that people will actually walk on this, that surface on top of that? Is that gonna
Yeah, there'd be a
plants?
trail,
Or there'd
yeah,
be a
so this
trail?
is the path that goes on, and then this is
Okay.
the roof of it.
Okay, but the roof will be like it's not plants, it's going to be like
Yeah, so,
It will be a
some
green
kind of
roof.
surface.
yeah, so this
So-
is all the structure just in this zone here, so this is all vegetated
Okay.
with a trail moving through a
Yeah,
landscape.
right.
Yeah.
I just thought of something else to point out. So near the house there on the hillside, there's a terrible invasive plant, Japanese knotweed. And I've been watching it for years now creep up the hillside. Yeah, so I would hope that would be taking that out. would be it. You know how I feel about invasive plants, so.
Everybody on the board knows how I feel about knotweed.
Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Evening, gentlemen. My name is Greg Pinto. First, I'd like to thank you for taking public input and for obviously putting a lot of time, thought, effort into your presentation. I have some of the same concerns that have already been mentioned. As Mr. Neal pointed out, the more natural place to put this parking is up on Middle Buck. There are 3 or 4 entrances already. It's flat, visible from the road. It's disturbed. It's already used. Just makes more sense. I understand you're concerned about the sightlines, but having grown up here and run around these bogs and been yelled at to get off of them when they were in production, I know them pretty well. I know that road quite well. It's doable. one of the things that nobody's mentioned about this particular spot is, nope. Back
Oh,
to
you
where-
want to go back?
Back where you were.
Sorry, yep,
That's fine.
yep. Sorry.
So, I don't know if everyone in the room can see it, or if anyone watching this at home on television can see it, but all along that hillside, you have topographical lines. The more closely packed they are, the more steep that slope is. So if you go over to the left side of that slide, just below your parking lot, that right now is a borrow pit. And even yet from there all the way left, those lines get more and more tightly packed as you go.
Yeah, that's this area. Here.
As I'm sure you guys know,
Yep.
and as I know from my professional experience working on golf courses, sand, which is the base of that hill, is not real stable. So you're going to have to do an awful lot of work there to make sure that that's stabilized. And I realize that there's going to be plantings and what have you and roots, and that takes time. The other big problem I have is with the roof over the amphitheater. It's nature. You don't need a roof over your amphitheater. You don't need to get out of the sun, out of the wind, out of the rain. Quite frankly, you're not getting out of the wind anyway, because the wind always comes north-south through there. If you put a roof there, we need to put on our hard-soled shoes, get out our gloves, our brooms and pans, and bring down our biohazard bags so that we can scoop up the needles. Because that is inviting. It's just a perfect place for your drug addicts to go down and shoot up. It doesn't take them long, and they're out of sight. Even if the car is up in the parking lot, cops are gonna go by, there's a car, that's nice, keep going. Because there's nothing that they can see that's nefarious that's going on, because it's hidden down the hill. Roof's not a good idea. I mean, I love the plan and the overlook and the meadow and that. I mean, it's a great concept, but in practice, you're inviting trouble. That sort of stuff already happens down there. You don't need to make it more inviting. And please, don't put any lights in a parking lot. There's enough light pollution already. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Actually, one of the things that does start to mitigate that type of use is things like the dog walkers. And when we have good trails and we have other people coming there, it's that natural deterrent of having just other uses. And I think typically a lot of the people who are, if you're doing drugs or something else that's illegal, inappropriate, they tend to seek out other kind of quieter areas.
I can tell you for a fact, like I said, I grew up here. I've been counting fish down there for however many years we've been doing the fish counts, or almost quite that long. I have personally watched drug deals going on down there while I'm counting fish. Pulled out my phone, made a phone call. Hey, can you come down to Middle Bog? There's something going on. Yeah, okay, thanks. It doesn't happen during the day when the people are walking dogs. It happens at night when it's dark.
Yeah.
So that natural deterrent naturally goes home for dinner and to bed. There is no natural deterrent out there at night.
That's true. But if you have I think it's a discussion in terms of what's going to happen out there or not happen out there.
No, I'm talking about what already happens.
Okay, well, what already happens out there? I think for us to be debating what is going to be happening or not happening, if there's a roof there or not there, I still think that the attributes of having a wider use of the public will still act as a deterrent. Now, and the thing is, no matter where you are in town, once it gets dark, then everything becomes open game for the activities that you're describing.
Yeah, this is a discussion that we did have with the police department, with the town staff, and definitely consideration, something that we're going to continue talking about with the police and as we develop the plan. And obviously, a big issue throughout Massachusetts, throughout the Cape, and something that has to be strongly considered. So we appreciate your input.
You might say that the roads can be blocked to traffic too, just be open to.
Oh, yeah, and Betsy's just pointing out that that drive would be for emergency access only in the master plan here. So this road is for primarily for pedestrians, but police would have access. So this is a drivable lane. And we did just finish a project in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which had a lot of the similar concerns along the Merrimack River, where the spigot in the Merrimack. So we did a big restoration there. And interestingly, as you said, the lights, the police in that town encourage us not to do lights because that is an invitation to come into a site. It makes it a little bit more accessible, right? So not having lights was one of their deterrents. And also, we made all of the pathways mountable and easy for the patrol to drive into the site. And that could be a method used here, that this drive, is easily accessed by the police. So as part of their patrol on John Parker, they can also do a drive down this and out, which was a strategy that we used on that project in Lawrence, which has similar issues.
Hi, I'm Maureen Nolan, and I just wanted to ask a question about the parking lot, wherever it happens to actually be located now. The surface of the parking lot, it is going to be permeable,
Mhm.
so that there would be a lot of puddles and stuff.
Correct.
And I wondered about plantings around the parking lot. Some forest preserves and all are making their parking lots so that they have sort of a rain garden, sort of a depressed area with plantings in it, so that runoff from cars and stuff will actually go in there and it won't end up in the river. So I was just
Yeah.
wondering if that's a consideration.
Yeah, that's a great point and something that we would definitely incorporate into the design. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Great. Well, thank you very much for everyone's input. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you want to turn it? Yeah. I think it just comes easily.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, the Conservation Commission commissioners, could you all come in front? Because you still have a little more, sorry, well, you guys can stay where you are. We still have some more business, and I'm sure a lot of you still have some comments, so could you talk quietly in the back? We should only be 5 minutes.
Yeah, there are boards in the back if you want to look at some.
Yeah, everybody.
More detail.
Yeah. But just talk quietly for a couple of minutes. And thanks everybody for coming. That's it. It's exciting.
In the very beginning. So, this item, vote 15 Cary Lane.
I make, my only comment is that they keep the limit of work control.
Do you want to make any findings that it's in after the fact?
Yeah, the
Right.
Yeah.
control.
After the fact, and then control limit work. I think that's about it.
That's about it, yeah. They have to clean the catch basins.
All right.
Clean the catch basins.
No increase in scope, correct?
No.
Do you think they're fundamentally in compliance?
Yes. I do. No, I sat with the builder and because that was one of my questions. I was like, did you increase the footprint? And their response was no. Can I tell?
Didn't you say a little bit more?
Yeah,
A couple
less.
inches maybe?
Yeah. Can I tell until they give me a plan? I mean, it looks the same. It's not substantial. Let's put it that way.
Just the lot in general looks a lot more stripped than I recall.
They stripped lot line.
Yes.
And that's why when they leave, that's why when I know laws is built, but when they have a limit of work, the contractor believes anything inside that limit of work, it can be gone. So if we don't specify that those trees have to be saved, they just go. But Steve Stimson plan was pretty extensive replanting.
Yeah, well.
As long as we can follow through with that.
Yeah. And the limit of work on, by Quisson Harbor, on that side, on that coastal bank, is really degraded, so, I don't know how you do that, but I'm gonna keep after them. Where the pool is, you go down and you look off the hill to where the road comes up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
It's gone.
it's gone. I mean, they have probably, 300 cubic yards of fill there that's washing down. There's a lot
And even
of
on
excavated
Carrie Lane
material
proper,
there.
there's a lot of washout. The gates, and the access you need.
They actually did almost a little work on that material. I don't know. I mean, they just need better site management. Maybe we'll go give them a little lesson.
May I make a motion to accept this discuss?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous.
So make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So